Hello there, and welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we're diving into a topic that's as exciting as it is utterly bewildering trade policy. Specifically, we're talking about Donald Trump's love affair with tariffs. Those taxes on imported goods that he wields with all the subtlety of a rhinoceros performing ballet. During his presidency, Trump launched a full-scale trade war, slapping tariffs on everything from Chinese steel to French wine, all under the banner of his America First agenda. It was a policy that felt less like a carefully calibrated economic strategy and more like someone discovered the tariff button in the Oval Office and just couldn't stop mashing it, like a toddler with a new toy that makes a loud, annoying noise. Now, with the possibility of a second Trump term looming, those tariffs are back in the headlines. It's a bit like finding out your least favorite 80s hair metal band is planning a reunion tour. You thought you'd moved on, but here we are again, staring down the barrel of another round of economic power chords. The debate is just as fierce as ever. Supporters see tariffs as a necessary tool to protect American industries and jobs, a way to stand up to countries they believe are playing dirty. On the other hand, critics, and there are many, argue that these policies are a self-inflicted wound, hurting American consumers and businesses far more than they help. So tonight, we're going to untangle this economic spaghetti. We'll look at the 5 main arguments Trump and his supporters make for why tariffs are, in fact, the greatest thing since sliced bread, or at least since sliced American-made bread that costs 30% more. We'll examine the logic behind protecting jobs, reducing trade deficits, punishing unfair practices, bolstering national security, and using them as a high-stakes negotiating tool. It's a complex issue full of bluster, big numbers, and even bigger consequences. So grab a snack, perhaps an imported one while you still can, because this is going to be quite a ride. All right, let's start with the headline act. The argument you'll hear shouted from every campaign rally podium: tariffs protect American jobs. The logic on the surface seems as simple and appealing as a golden retriever puppy. The idea is this: by slapping a hefty tax on, say, foreign-made washing machines, those imports become more expensive. Suddenly, the shiny new American-made washing machine in the showroom looks like a much better deal. In theory, this encourages consumers and businesses to buy American, which in turn means American factories need to hire more workers to keep up with demand. It's a vision of revitalized manufacturing, of bustling factory floors and prosperous communities, all shielded from the cold winds of global competition. It's a powerful narrative, isn't it? It paints a picture of a government stepping in to save the noble American worker from being undercut by cheaper labor overseas. Proponents will point to specific industries like steel and aluminum where tariffs were imposed and argue that jobs were saved or even created. They'll tell you this is how you fight back against decades of decline, how you bring pride and paychecks back to the Rust Belt. It's the economic equivalent of building a fortress around the country with tariffs as the high protective walls. Every imported product that gets taxed is, in their view, another brick in that wall, securing the livelihoods of the people inside. It's a simple, patriotic message that's incredibly effective. The problem is, the economy isn't a simple fortress. It's more like an incredibly complex, interconnected Jenga tower. When you start yanking out blocks from one side, you can't be surprised when the other side starts to wobble precariously. While a tariff might help a steelworker in Pittsburgh, what about the American company in Ohio that uses that now more expensive steel to manufacture car parts? Their costs just went up, making them less competitive against foreign car part manufacturers. Suddenly, they might have to lay off workers to stay afloat. It's a classic case of economic whack-a-mole. You smack down a problem in one place and 2 more pop up somewhere else, often where you least expect them, and that's the central tension of this argument. It presents a zero-sum game, us versus them, where the only way for American workers to win is for foreign workers to lose. But global supply chains are a tangled mess of international cooperation. A product proudly made in the USA might contain dozens of components from a dozen different countries. The tariff intended as a shield for one industry becomes a shackle for another. So while the goal of protecting American jobs is undeniably noble, the method is a bit like performing surgery with a sledgehammer. You might hit your target, but you're probably going to cause a spectacular amount of collateral damage in the process. Now let's move on to argument number 2, which is all about Trump's arch nemesis, his Moby Dick, his personal Lex Luthor, the trade deficit. If you've listened to Trump talk about trade for more than 30 seconds, you've heard him lament the trade deficit, which is simply the difference between how much a country imports and how much it exports. To him, a trade deficit isn't just an accounting figure, it's a scoreboard, and America is losing, badly. He views it as other countries ripping us off, taking our money and giving us, well, goods. But apparently not in a way that feels fair. It's like he thinks international trade is a poker game where China keeps walking away with all the chips. His solution, once again, is the tariff. The logic here is twofold. First, as we've discussed, making imports more expensive should, in theory, lead Americans to buy fewer of them. Fewer imports means the import side of the ledger goes down. Second, he believes tariffs are a tool to force other countries to change their behavior. The idea is that if we hit China, for example, with enough tariffs on their goods, they will be so desperate to regain access to the massive American market that they'll agree to buy more American products, like soybeans or Boeing airplanes. More exports means the export side of the ledger goes up. Voila! The deficit shrinks, and in Trump's mind, America is winning again. It's an approach that treats the global economy like a neighborhood dispute over a fence line. You're not buying enough of my prize-winning roses, so I'm going to start catapulting squirrels into your yard until you do. It's aggressive, it's direct, and it certainly gets everyone's attention. The goal is to rebalance the scales, to stop the outflow of American dollars and turn the tide. He sees it as a simple matter of leverage. We have the world's largest consumer market, and he believes that gives us the power to dictate terms. If other countries want to sell to us, they have to play by our rules, and rule number 1 is buy more of our stuff. But the size of a cargo ship. Most economists will tell you that a trade deficit isn't inherently good or bad. It's a number, not a moral failing. For example, a large trade deficit can simply mean that a country's consumers are wealthy and can afford to buy a lot of goods from abroad, or that foreign investors have so much confidence in the US economy that they are pouring money into it, which affects the balance of payments. Furthermore, the punish them until they buy our stuff strategy often backfires spectacularly. Instead of caving, other countries tend to respond with something called retaliatory tariffs. They start taxing American goods, making them more expensive for their citizens. The result isn't a shrinking deficit, it's a trade war where everyone just ends up paying more for everything. The third pillar of the pro-tariff argument is that they are a righteous weapon against countries that engage in what are called unfair trade practices. This is where the rhetoric moves from economics to justice. The picture painted is of a world full of commercial villains who have been taking advantage of America's good nature for far too long. The main culprits in this narrative are practices like government subsidies, dumping, and the rampant theft of intellectual property. It's the idea that other nations aren't just outcompeting us, they're cheating. And when someone cheats, you don't just ask them to stop, you punish them. Let's break down the charges. Government subsidies are when a country, like China, gives its domestic companies money or tax breaks to make their products artificially cheap. Dumping is when those companies then sell those products in a foreign market, like the United States, at a price that's even lower than what it costs to make them, all in an effort to drive local competitors out of business. And then there's intellectual property theft, the outright stealing of American technology, patents, and trade secrets. The argument is that these practices have hollowed out American industries, and that traditional diplomatic channels and organizations like the World Trade Organization are too slow, too weak, and too ineffective to stop it. Enter the tariff, stage left, wearing a superhero cape. In this view, tariffs are not just a tax. They are a fine. They are a penalty. They are the economic equivalent of putting a country in a timeout corner until it learns to play fair. The goal is to inflict enough economic pain on the offending nation that it's forced to change its ways. Stop subsidizing your steel industry. Stop dumping cheap solar panels on our market. Stop stealing the blueprints for our next-generation jet engines. The tariffs are the leverage used to force these changes, a blunt instrument for a problem that, supporters argue, requires a blunt response. It's about leveling the playing field, even if you have to bulldoze it first. The counter-argument, however, is that this approach is like using a cluster bomb to take out a sniper. You might get your target, but you'll also create a massive amount of collateral damage, much of it on your own side. American companies that rely on components from those countries see their costs skyrocket. American consumers end up paying higher prices for a huge range of goods, not just the ones being dumped. And it can escalate tensions, turning a specific trade dispute into a broader, more damaging economic conflict. Critics argue that while the problems of IP theft and subsidies are very real, a unilateral tariff war is a clumsy and counterproductive way to solve them, alienating allies who could be helping to apply multilateral pressure instead. Let's turn to an argument that hits a little differently, one that shifts the conversation from dollars and cents to defense and survival national security. The core idea here is that being overly reliant on other countries, especially potential adversaries like China, for critical goods is a massive strategic vulnerability. Think about it. What happens if a global crisis, like a pandemic or a military conflict, suddenly cuts off our supply of essential medicines, microchips, or key components for our defense systems? The argument is that for decades we've outsourced the production of these vital goods in the name of efficiency and cheap prices, leaving ourselves dangerously exposed. The COVID-19 pandemic threw this fear into stark relief. Suddenly, America found itself scrambling for basic medical supplies like masks, gowns, and ventilator parts, much of which were manufactured in China. It was a jarring wake-up call. The pro-tariff argument leverages this anxiety, positing tariffs as a crucial tool for onshoring or bringing production of these critical goods back to the United States. By making it more expensive to import, say, advanced semiconductors from Taiwan or pharmaceutical ingredients from China, the government hopes to incentivize companies to build those factories right here on American soil. It's about self-reliance. This isn't just about medicine. The argument extends to anything deemed vital to the nation's functioning and defense. This includes steel for building warships, rare earth minerals for advanced electronics, and the telecommunications equipment that forms the backbone of our digital infrastructure. The fear is that a foreign adversary could, at any moment, turn off the spigot, crippling our economy and our military. Tariffs, therefore, are presented as a matter of patriotic necessity, a way to rebuild our domestic industrial base so that we are never again at the mercy of another nation for the things we need to survive and defend ourselves. It frames the policy not as protectionism, but as prudence. Of course, the critique of this approach is multifaceted. For one, it's incredibly expensive. Replicating complex, highly specialized global supply chains domestically would take decades and cost trillions of dollars, a cost that would inevitably be passed on to consumers and taxpayers. Secondly, critics question where you draw the line. What counts as a critical good? Is it just microchips, or does it include car tires, baby formula, or coffee? The definition can become dangerously flexible. Finally, many experts argue that true security comes not from isolation, but from having a diverse set of reliable suppliers and strong alliances. By engaging in trade wars, we risk alienating the very allies we would need to rely on in a crisis, potentially making ourselves less, not more, secure. Finally, we arrive at the fifth and perhaps most Trump-centric argument using tariffs as a negotiating tool. This is the art of the deal applied to global economics. In this worldview, international relations isn't about partnership, it's a series of transactions, and to get the best deal, you have to be willing to be unpredictable, aggressive, and to walk away from the table. Or in this case, to impose massive economic pain until the other side gives you what you want. Trump sees tariffs not as a permanent policy, but as a temporary bargaining chip, a massive stick to be waved around during negotiations. The strategy is essentially a high-stakes game of chicken. For example, during the renegotiation of NAFTA, the trade deal between the United States, Mexico, and Canada, Trump threatened and then imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum from our closest neighbors. He also repeatedly threatened to slap massive tariffs on all cars imported from those countries. The explicit goal was to create so much pressure and uncertainty for the Canadian and Mexican economies that their leaders would have no choice but to agree to a new deal, the USMCA, that was more favorable to the United States. It's deal-making through coercion. The idea is that America's economic might, particularly the size of its consumer market, is its greatest weapon. By threatening to cut off access to that market, Trump believes he can force other countries to make concessions they would never otherwise agree to. This could mean lowering their own tariffs on American goods, opening up their markets to American services, or agreeing to stronger labor and environmental standards. The tariffs are the crowbar used to pry open closed markets and rewrite the rules of trade in America's favor. It's a strategy that casts the president not as a statesman, but as the world's toughest negotiator, unafraid to play hardball to get a win for his country. However, critics argue that this approach treats our allies like business rivals and fundamentally damages trust, which is the bedrock of international diplomacy. When you constantly threaten your partners, they start looking for other, more reliable partners. This strategy also assumes that other countries will always back down, which is far from guaranteed. It can easily lead to escalating trade wars that harm all parties involved, including the American businesses and workers the policy is supposed to help. Furthermore, the deals that result, like the USMCA, are often seen by economists as only marginal improvements over the old ones, hardly worth the economic chaos and damaged relationships caused by the tariff threats used to achieve them. It's like setting your own house on fire to negotiate a lower rent. You might succeed, but you're left standing in the ashes. So there you have it. Trump's tariffs are a complex beast, driven by a potent mix of populist appeal and nationalist economics. They are the central tool in his America First vision, designed to shield American jobs, slash the trade deficit, punish cheaters, ensure national self-reliance, and strong-arm other countries into better deals. It's a vision that resonates with many who feel left behind by globalization. The promise is a return to a time of American industrial might, a nation secure within its own economic fortress, no longer at the mercy of foreign powers. It's a powerful and seductive story. However, as we've seen, for every argument in favor of this strategy, there is a powerful and well-supported counter-argument. The vast majority of economists, a group not exactly known for agreeing on anything, tend to warn that this path is fraught with peril. They argue that tariffs are a blunt instrument that ultimately acts as a tax on a country's own citizens, raising prices and hurting consumers. They warn of retaliatory measures that harm American exporters, of damaged diplomatic relationships with key allies, and of the immense, perhaps impossible cost of trying to disentangle from the global economy. The fortress, they say, can easily become a prison. And now, looking ahead to a potential 2024 election, Trump is not just talking about targeted tariffs. He's proposing a baseline 10% universal tariff on virtually all imported goods. This would be a dramatic escalation, a move that would undoubtedly trigger a global economic backlash and inject a huge dose of uncertainty and inflation into the United States economy. It is the ultimate gamble, betting that the benefits of protectionism and economic coercion will outweigh the risks of a full-blown worldwide trade war. Whether you see that as a bold plan to save America or a reckless leap into an economic abyss really depends on which side of this complex, high-stakes debate you fall on.